Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where we're going to get historical today because we're going to be talking about just how historically accurate should historical novels be. It's a question. So, I've been reading this book. This is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, the first of the Wolf Hall trilogy. And this is a story about Thomas Cromwell, the real-life historical person, Thomas Cromwell. And the three novels are kind of his rise and fall, more or less. And I'm not too far into this. How far am I? I'm at 179 pages into this book. Really, really enjoyable book. I really like it. This is one of those novels that do what historical novels should do, and that it transports you to another place in time. And you get really invested and involved in this story. At least I do. I know that there have been mixed reviews on this. I can kind of understand it because Hilary Mantel does make some interesting stylistic choices, which I know that some people wouldn't be down with, but I am. I think it works actually really well. And I'm really enjoying this book tremendously. But reading it, it did make me think of a few things when it comes to historical fiction, and one of those things is about accuracy, as far as how close does it come to actual history. Now, of course, the character in this novel, Thomas Cromwell, isn't the real Thomas Cromwell. It's a character in a book named Thomas Cromwell that is based on the historical person. Historical novels, you know, you have different kinds of historical novels. Sometimes they're all about actual people from history, and those people are made into characters in the book. Sometimes it's about made-up people in a historical setting. Sometimes it's about made-up people who run into people who are based on real-life historical people. So there's a few different ways you can do a historical novel. This is pretty much based on real people. The characters they're based on actual human beings that lived at one time long ago. But how close should it actually come to actual real-life history? So, of course, when you have any kind of novel or artistic creation, you have to give the creator some leeway, right? Sometimes a story will just work better a little bit if you change a few things or a lot of things. And when it comes to events in history, you have the basic events, but we don't always know how those events went down. We weren't there when a lot of these historical people were talking to each other. We don't know what went through their heads. We don't know the actual conversations of many of the events or most of the events that happened in history. So all of that stuff has to be made up dramatically. It has to be made up dramatically if it's in a novel. But how far should you go? This is a question. So far, I think Hilary Mantel is doing actually a pretty good job. Nothing has veered so far away from the truth that it becomes distracting or odd, which it can be. So I think, so far, this novel is doing it right, I think, in that it stays close enough to the events of history that it's doing more than just filling in the gaps. It's actually telling you a story using that history. And I think that's the way to do it. And while this is not about the real Cromwell, whose thoughts we don't know, and whose actions, you know, some of them we know and a lot of them we don't. This is a made-up Cromwell, but this made-up Cromwell's life, at least so far, seems to be close enough aligned to the real Cromwell's that it doesn't become distracting or annoying to those who actually know the history. like I said, there are always going to be changes made in historical novels or any kind of artistic endeavor based on real people or real places or real times or real events. You know, changes are going to be made, but how far could you go in making changes? This got me thinking of another book I read at one time called The Gates of Rome by Con Egulden. This was actually a fairly popular historical novel. It's about some guy named Caesar. There was an actual Caesar in Rome, and you know what about Caesar? He lived in a very well-documented time. We know a lot about what happened, and we know a lot about the specific historical events and how they went down in that time because it was so well documented. This book, well, it's supposed to be about Caesar, but the character in this book is so far, I mean, the events of this character's life, everything is, there's so much that's changed that this character in this book is so different, and his life is so different, and the events have been changed so much that this character bears very little resemblance to the actual Caesar. It's okay to make stuff up, but man, if it's supposed to be about Caesar, maybe stick at least a little bit close to the actual events of the time in Caesar's life. And this doesn't just go for Caesar, it goes for Augustus, it goes for a bunch of other characters, a bunch of other real-life people that were around at this time. Their names are in the book, but they bear very little relation to the actual people who lived at the time. And one of the odd things is that the changes that were made actually make the people in this book less interesting than their namesakes who lived in real life. It would have been a more interesting book if Con Egulden had decided to, I don't know, stay somewhere within the realm of historical accuracy. Doesn't even try, man. This book is, it's not my favorite book. And so if you go into this book and you know like anything at all about Caesar's life or political events at this time in ancient Rome, this book is just going to annoy you because it doesn't even try. It doesn't even try to come close. It's like telling a completely different story about completely different people who have a vague resemblance to the people in actual life. And that's annoying. I kind of think it should be in the ballpark, you know what I mean? And this one really isn't. And it's true, like I said, when you're dealing with history and people in history who actually lived long, long ago, in this case, ancient history, there are things you just don't know. And you have to make stuff up. I mean, you want to make stuff up. It's a novel. It's an artistic creation. But how far do you want to go? I think a better way to do it was done by Colleen McCullough in The First Man in Rome. I haven't read this entire series, but this book, again, based on actual real-life people who lived in ancient Rome, this took place a little earlier than Caesar, but very close. And the lives, the characters who Colleen McCullough is describing, this book is based on real people, and the characters in this book are based on actual people that lived at one time. And an awful lot is made up, of course, but the lives of these characters stick close enough to the real lives of these people, and the historical events are close enough that it's not distracting. Every time you read a book like this and you know the history, there are moments when you're going to be like, oh, no, that's not the way it went down. But you get a little more leeway in ancient history because even the stuff that's well documented, it's not perfectly documented. But like I said, you want to stick at least close to it, I think. Just so it's not distracting and it just doesn't become some fantasy novel of fantasy characters. Then it becomes a whole other thing. I think another person who did it pretty well was Stephen Pressfield with Gates of Fire. Everybody loves this book, Gates of Fire, who's read it. About ancient Sparta and the 300 Spartans who fought off the Persians. And this is an excellent book. Stephen Pressfield had to make more stuff up than McCullough did, I think, because while we have an idea of what actually happened from Herodotus, the details are... there's a lot of wiggle room there. And so Pressfield could get away with a lot in this book, because while we know a lot, there's a lot we don't know. But still, he stays close enough to what we do know about these people in this event that it's not distracting or annoying to those of us who actually know what happened, as far as what's documented anyway. Also, it tells a really, really good story. So even changes that were made, if the story's good enough, it's kind of worth it, you know, which I don't think you could say about Connie Golden's book at all, actually. And, you know, sometimes you go into a book without knowing a ton about the history, like Shogun, when I read Shogun. I don't know much about the time period in which Shogun takes place. Even so, there were things I knew were anachronistic, and I was able to spot some things that weren't right, but most of the stuff that happened at this time in Japan, I'm not going to know, you know. But damn, this story was so good. So I really don't know how close this sticks to actual history. But the story is so riveting, and you actually do feel like you're in a genuine environment. One thing about historical fiction is that you do want to feel like these people are existing in a real place, you know, and not like in a TV movie, like in Connie Golden's book, you know, where it could just be a bad sword and sandals epic with, you know. Anyway, I'll stop trashing that book. I know some people like it. But, you know, this one, Shogun, I really don't know how close it sticks to the history because I haven't read much about the history of this time period. I wonder if I was really well read on this, if it would annoy me to death, or whether, because it's such an entertaining book, that it wouldn't matter. And it's such a riveting story. It's hard to say. I think, basically, that you should stick as close as you can to the basic events and the basic real lives of any real life, any characters you have in a book that are based on real people. You should stick close enough that nothing is jarring, you know. All the time in historical fiction, you have real life people that existed in real life that aren't in the book, either because they were never talked about or because it's just more convenient to write out those characters. Or maybe you'll put in some made-up characters into your book that's full of real-life people just out of convenience or because you want a really good character in there. I mean, that pretty much happens in every single historical novel. That stuff's okay. I'm not saying you can't have creative license. I'm just like, stay in the ballpark. You know, don't make any terrible anachronistic mistakes. Some of them are going to get in there, but don't make any glaring ones. I'm pretty sure that someday, in the distant future, if there is one, someone's going to write a book that's set in the 1990s, and you're going to have people using, like, smartphones in the book. I know this could happen in the far future, because that's the kind of stuff that happens in historical novels sometimes. But, you know, at least try. At least try to stick close. Anyway, I'll shut up now. Those are just some thoughts. And I'm interested in your thoughts and what you think about this. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.